Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Two Wizards and a Mic. Here we talk about D&D. We're old. If you put those two things together, we are wizards with wisdom on which to impart to make your gaming experience better, more awesomer, and stuff. I am Shane.
And I am Andrew.
And today we're talking about matching your monsters to their settings, which is something that I love because there's nothing worse than playing a game and having your immersion broken when you experience or run into a monster that really has no business being where you are. So I think the Displacer Beast is a perfect example in my world. But Andrew, take it away.
All right. Well, first I'll give a quick update for the Kickstarters. So Phelan 2 now, the last Kickstarter, everything's pretty much wrapped up. There's a couple of outstanding um, questions with a few of the orders, but for the most part, that is finally wrapped up because books are arriving in Australia and far off reaches.
Oh, wow.
Um, The new Kickstarter, the Dungeon Book, the first two, so the layout is done, the manuscript is done. Basically the layout's done. There's going to be some tweaking. The art is done for now, 2 chapters. The artist has been is on the con circuit this summer, so he's in pause mode, but hopefully he'll continue soon. If you want to follow along with that, you can check the link below, and you can follow on our Discord page where we do updates, and of course on the Kickstarter page. And we have pictures of the art and the progress in the book. So that one is actually moving along quite well. And as far as today, as Shane said, matching monsters to settings. So the idea is basically building your campaign or your adventure from the ground up, and how to do that, and what monsters to include. So you want to
Yeah.
focus, of course, on the story that you want to do. I'm actually doing this right now. Shane's group just finished a campaign on the weekend, got to 20th level, saved the world of Greyhawk. It's pretty awesome. Um,
I gotta say, thank you. Thank you.
I think most players only lost one character during that campaign on the way to 20th level, so that was pretty good.
Yeah, I think I lost one. Of course, as you were pointing out after the game, after we finished the other day, uh, that we've been doing that particular campaign for just over 4 years,
Yeah.
and it uh, it was kind of fun because I after you said that, my brain was like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. What character am I playing? I'm playing this character. But then you were like, oh yeah, no, I think everyone here except for like one person has actually lost at least one
Yeah.
character. And then I remembered all of these sad moments of losing characters back, a few years ago. But yeah, it was a blast. It was a total blast.
Yeah, and it was slowed down, as you say, by the pandemic, moving to play online for a few years, and we don't play as regularly as we used to. 9 years ago, we were playing every week, so
Yep.
now we play usually twice a month, but sometimes only once a month. So that was pretty awesome. So now I'm creating a new campaign, and that's what I'm doing. I'm thinking, okay, what monsters would make sense in the story that I want to do? Um, what makes sense for what kind of creatures would live in this location, and like the actual physical environment. How are they connected to the story? Motivation, because really, if you know that for your monsters and your NPCs, you can run from there. Where do the monsters live? Like, that's always an interesting one, because if you're going to have cities and settlements, those usually aren't where the monsters are, because it doesn't make sense. A functioning city is going to have a giant walking down the street or a beholder floating down the alleyway. Unless the city maybe is in the Underdark or the Feyland, right?
Right.
So you have to think about that. What kind of things would they eat? How do they get around? So it also helps, I think, to create encounters that are going to be able to be moved around, because you don't know what the players are going to do. So a lot of my encounters I make so they can happen in different places. And then you usually build your story, from easier to harder. Although
Yeah.
sometimes, like recently, I started a game off by having a dragon turtle emerge from the river, eat an old woman, and then attack the party. So one of the players said, "Let me get this straight. It's 5 minutes in, and a dragon turtle is attacking us." I said, "Actually, it's more like 3 minutes in." Um, so once in a while, it's fun to start with a big, tough encounter, but usually you want to build like a regular story. You want to build to a climax.
Right, right.
Um, you obviously want to pay attention to the CR. There's a lot of talk that CR is broken. It doesn't mean anything. I don't really think that's true. I think for the most part, it's pretty good. And what you want is a monster that matches the level of the characters. Um, but you have to think about things like what can the monster do? What can the characters do? So as you DM more and more, you'll get an idea for a balance. There
Yeah.
are a few monsters that are broken, like the Shadow is definitely the CR is wrong. Shadow is definitely tougher than I think it's one half they gave it. And I think a Shadow is more like 2 or 3 at least. Let me just look here. Shadow challenge rating. Yeah, one half, which is the equivalent of an orc. And I think a Shadow is a lot tougher than an orc. Um, so for the most part, I think CR is good. You want to use the terrain that you have. Consider the monster's intelligence. We did a show that, really most of the monsters don't know what they're doing. They're not that bright. But as the characters get higher level, they're going to have more intelligent creatures to deal with. And then my Lucas elements, I always like to have these random elements sprinkled in that help make the world feel like it's alive. So in Star Wars, Lucas will have a robot wander, in the background past the characters, or you'll
Yeah.
see like this giant lizard with a stormtrooper riding it in the distance behind, and all those things, or maybe a bird flying through the sky, a weird alien bird. All those things add to the realism of your stories. And the first thing that I will do when I'm planning a campaign in terms of what monsters, I'll write the basic part of the story and start to flesh that out. But then I'll grab the monster manual. Here's the new one, um, which is not too bad, 5e1. I'll grab that, or I'll grab our monster books that we publish. You go to the back. They do have a section that goes through all the different terrains settings. Um, page of 302. It's okay, but they've missed a few things in there. It's an okay place to start. But usually I just go to the CR list, which we have in our books too, like this part of the book, and I go
Right.
through it and I start, especially when it's the beginning of the adventure, the characters are first level. I literally start with CR0 and start going through what would make sense you know, what would make sense to be here, and looking through our monster books. And yeah, there's also pretty good encounter tables on in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Those ones are good, although weirdly enough, like we mentioned the other day, there's no dungeon encounters. I believe there's
That's
none.
true.
I believe there's none in here too. There's none in the monster manual either. So your game is Dungeons and Dragons, and you have no dungeon encounters in your Dungeon Master's Guide. The guide is called Dungeon Master's Guide.
It's kind of like they forgot or they're trying to hide something. Conspiracy confirmed.
Yes.
Uh,
Exactly. Exactly. Um, so we'll give you some examples. I also add in the NPCs, obviously, and that's really the foundation of building your adventure. And then I flesh the story out more because I know what monsters are going to be around. And there's a few examples we can give, some from some classic adventures, some from stories we did. And
right.
but we'll do that in a second. The first thing, the most basic one, most basic example, say I was having a desert campaign. So I would start in the monster manual or monster book, challenge rating 0. So if you look really quickly, it actually doesn't take long to do it. What would make sense? So right away I see at 0, giant fire beetle, jackal, lizard, Those would be perfect for a desert. Scorpion, vulture. Um, those are going to be great encounters for your first game with your first level characters.
Right.
Challenge rating 1/8. Camel, poisonous snake, perfect for the desert. Challenge rating 1/4. You quickly look, and there's giant lizard, giant poisonous snake. There's not too many that for that. And then challenge rating 1/2. There's giant wasp. I could see that. And that's about it for that level. So you go through all the different levels, the CR levels, and you see what makes sense. And there are going to be obviously some tweaks to that, right? Like if you have a dungeon in your story with some mad wizard or something, then maybe he's conjured some creatures that wouldn't normally be there, right?
Right. Right.
So there's some adaptations you can make. It's not purely to the terrain and the that sort of setting. There's other elements in the story. So if we look back at our Adventures in Mir, which is also published, it's levels 1 to 20. It has this evil alliance, which has a hierarchy. That's the idea in that story that, as I said before, usually do it that the characters encounter, the lower level creatures and then higher ones. So in that story, the hierarchy starts with a halfling gang, annoying rogues. Then you move up to, and at that level, in a city, they have sort of their headquarters is underground. So then if you look at that, like giant rats, mastiffs, swarms of rats and bats, some oozes, those kind of things would be the things that would make sense in an underground, like sewer, catacomb sort of environment for the city. The next layer is the vampires. And at that level, again, it's a city, mostly a city campaign. You're looking at assassins, vampire spawn, vampires, and that's sort of levels, by that point, sort of 7 to maybe 12 at least. And then the really high level part of this story is that there's devils running the whole structure of the organization. So then you're talking about pit fiends and arch devils and more powerful vampires, maybe arch mage, high level fighters, and yeah. So it's that's some examples for in terms of what would make sense in a city kind of campaign. Then in another campaign we did, which was basically a survival campaign, which we're probably going to publish next year. It's a barren area. It run by bandit lords. There's not much wealth around at all. So at low levels, and that was where this undead threat was moving into the area. At low levels, you're talking zombies, skeletons, shadow. Again, I don't agree that it's challenge rating 1/2, but it's not really high level. Things like wights. And then as the adventure went on, there were more powerful undead like banshees, ghosts, wraiths, undead pirates. And then the really high level, it turns out this lich was behind the whole thing. So that's a basic sort of look at an undead sort of campaign. Now, if we look back in the history of D&D, the first module I ever did, B2, The Keep on the Borderlands. So another beginning adventure. And looking at that, the first part, there's a keep. And so this is going to be similar to a city where it's mostly going to be humanoids who are going to be in there. Again, it wouldn't make sense other than maybe the dungeon area for a monster to be wandering around, especially if it's a functioning keep. Then you're probably not even going to have oozes and things like that. It's mostly going to be humanoids. But as you move out into the wilderness, then they add other elements. So there's lizard men, there's giant spiders, bandits. And then they add what I would consider like a Lucas element where you meet this mad hermit. So it's a kind of unpredictable part of the story that adds in a bit of flavor. And then the final part, you go from keep to the wilderness. And then the last part is in caves. And those caves are filled with evil humanoids and things like sturges, zombies, fire beetles, oozes. And so that's sort of like a traditional dungeon crawl. that sort of idea.
That's totally crazy. I mean, why would they have that in D&D at all? Dungeon crawls? No.
Yeah, exactly. Some people ask me, like, what things would you add to that old adventure? So because you would have humanoids in the castle, in the keep part of it, there already is a priest, but I probably would add maybe a magic user you could add to that story, or a rogue. And then I would maybe put a helpful prisoner that they found in the keep. That, I think that's always an interesting um, trope to use, is finding a prisoner who ends up being helpful, or finding a prisoner who's a spy is good too. Um, Another old adventure is you won the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. So this one has sort of two main locations, really. There's a wilderness manor, and then there's a ship nearby. And in the wilderness manor, again, this is a beginner adventure. So there's things like they have weasels in the garden. This manor is like falling apart. So it's like an overgrown garden. There's weasels, there's poisonous snakes in there, um, giant rats. When you get in the house, there's spiders, sturges, skeletons, oozes. And then when you get to the ship later, there's mostly humanoids again. So mostly
Right.
humans, and then there also happen to be lizard men on the ship. And somebody asked me again, what would I add to that old adventure? I would put more creatures in the ocean around the ship, between the ship and the manor, to make it more realistic. Like, because what if somebody fell in there or got thrown in there? That would be really interesting. You know, you could add, depending on what the water was like, you could have sharks, um, evil mer people like Marrow. You know, you could have eels and you know, even like killer fish. And so
I've always pictured salt marsh as being like the Caribbean. Like, is that, am I assuming that
hmm,
correctly? Like, that's kind of the climate, or is it more north? I mean, I guess it, to me, when I'm visualizing the map,
right.
um, it's kind of almost dead center. Like, not quite, but pretty close. So
Yeah,
I find that kind of equatorial, maybe.
yeah, I would say it's a bit north of that. Um, if you look, if I'm thinking of the map, like I'm trying to remember what it looks like right now, I'm pretty sure the hot like jungle type area is off to the west and even further south. Oh, sorry, to the east and further south. And then there might be some more of that too to the east and south, but it's still fair, like you say, it's still kind of more in the middle of the map. It's definitely not a cold climate. I would say it's sort of, yeah, I would say it's fairly mild. Like it's not, it's warmer, but it's not really warm, I would say. Um,
I
but you can,
just
that's the
hang
kind
on.
of thing.
I
Yeah,
just found the map of it. It's a map that I've used off and on,
right.
but essentially, so yeah, so here is, let me just make this full screen. So here basically is where, so this is the map
Yeah,
of the whole world, and
yeah.
Salt Marsh is right here. So yeah, it's definitely a little bit further north. I would sort of think the equatorial sort of divide is around here,
Yeah, I think
but
that area, if you see below the Azure Sea,
yeah,
that area to me would be the more jungle, tropical, hotter part.
right, right.
Down, yeah, all down there. But it's not cold. You can see like it's,
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, there's mountains. There's no really, there's no like the wastes of the snow people or something. It
yeah,
seems to be pretty
that's in
lush.
a different place. Like you can see the White
Yeah,
Mountains off to the left. That's where you
yeah,
guys found the frost giant lair over there.
yeah, yeah, somewhere
Yeah,
around here. Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
But
So
I just
yeah,
wanted to show that because I was very curious if that actually was like a. Uh, I'd never really
Caribbean.
considered that sort of environment, like the regional
Yeah.
environment. But
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing you want to think about. I mean, I've even gone to the point of researching, you know, what kind of beasts, like, you know, more natural creatures would be in this area. even to the point
Yeah.
of like looking like how long would a seal be underwater, what would like different creatures eat, and they actually used to have a column in the Dragon magazine. I don't know if you remember in the 70s and 80s called the Ecology of, and they would go through all
Mhm.
the many of the different creatures, and they would talk to you about what kind of like where would they be found, what would they eat, um, in great detail, not just beasts but monsters as well. Um, yeah, so those are all the kind of things you want to think about, like what would make sense to be in that area. Um, and what's the temperature, what's the weather like, what kind of food would they find, if you have a creature in a dungeon, like how is it surviving, right? How is it getting
Well,
around?
exactly.
I've seen a lot of people who they'll make a dungeon map, they'll write the adventure, and then they'll stick a black dragon or a red dragon in the dungeon, and then when the fight starts, you kind of look around and go, how did they get in here and how are they going to get out? Like,
Like uh I always think of this as the starving oozes, or the starving gelatinous cubes, because there's so many adventures where you run into like a trap where there's a cube on the floor. You don't see it, you step into it,
mhm.
you fall into it, but you kind of wonder how many adventurers come through here to be able to feed, because cubes get quite sizable, right? There's tiny ones, there's
Yeah,
really big
yeah,
ones. Like, how do you actually survive, or how does that creature actually survive?
yeah,
Like, is it living on rats? Are there enough rats? Like, I would
yeah,
not think of a dungeon being that populous to be able to feed creatures like that. It always makes me wonder, like when you
yeah,
run into them, it's like, oh no, you just want to pet them and go, are you okay?
yeah.
You've actually been feeding okay? You have
Well,
enough
I,
water?
I think the players get more immersed and it makes it more realistic. And if it's grounded in some kind of reality.
Yeah.
So it's another reason why I don't just focus on the CR. Like, for example, if the area or story is for a first level campaign, like the adventure I'm writing now, when I look at all the creatures that could be in there, I look at most of the CRs. Maybe I won't be looking like from level 10 and up for most of that first level campaign, but I actually first want to see what are all the creatures that would be there. And even if the party is first level, that doesn't mean that a level CR5 or CR10 creature might not just like go by or fly by or be talked about. So that's why it's another good idea to start with the low level creatures and go up, even when you have a higher level party, because there's your food for you, right? If you
Yeah.
like, I was looking at the desert, right? If you if your party's higher than first level, maybe now they're fighting a giant vulture, or a giant constrictor snake, right? But at the same time, you've already found out and written down that in that area there are fire beetles and jackals and lizards and vultures and camels. So, there's right there. Once you have that kind of range of monsters and beasts, now you have your ecology for you too, right?
Well, exactly, because then you could run into the lair of that snake, and and there could be just a mild touch of like, oh yeah, you see around, there's looks like what you think might be was a former camel, or was a fire beetle, I don't
Yeah,
know, wings or something around, and that kind of stuff totally makes sense. And that to me is it's to me it's a requirement, because you're not in a challenge, you're not, say, being thrown into like a maze that you have to get through by some overlord who's captured you or something. I mean, uh I give it up for the D&D film that came out a little while ago, where they had creatures that you would not normally encounter that often, but they were thrown into a maze. Like, here's the thing, you have to escape from this place, and here are some monsters we've had in cages, and we're going to throw them in because they're hungry and they want to eat you. That kind of stuff. That kind of stuff is really great, because there are so many magical creatures that I know that I've played in the past over the years, where it's like you kind of oh, you see a blah, and then you're like, we're in a desert. That creature I just would happen to it's a hippo. Why is that
Mhm.
here? Those kinds of things. We don't have any oases. We've never run into water, or
Mhm.
just kind of that kind of stuff, and it's that organic feel that I really like. So having that ecology of an adventure where you're running into a snake like that who has been obviously feeding on stuff that's available to it.
Mhm.
So to me, I love those little touches.
Yeah, and you can also foreshadow the more powerful creatures or the big bad evil guy, right? Maybe the dragon who ends up being the main bad guy in the story, the main villain, maybe he is seen flying overhead, even when the characters are first level.
Yeah,
And that's how I even build the encounter tables. So what some people do is they build their encounter tables just based on CR, and if the party's first level, then all the creatures are going to be maybe CR 0 to 1. But what I do usually, and in most of our books, I build the encounter tables for the whole area for all the CRs, and I put them all on the table. Because when you're rolling dice, because of the bell curve, you're mostly going to roll rolls in the middle, right?
yeah.
Like the D20, for example, you're mostly going to roll around 7 to 15. And it's rare that you're going to get to the ones and 20s and twos and 19s, right? So when you do an encounter table, you can put the creatures that are going to be most likely encountered in the middle of the table. And then the ends of the tables, you can have the less common ones. So that's what I do. I have the high CR creatures at the top, on the far sides of the table, and then in the middle I have all the low level creatures. And then as the table goes out, it gets tougher. And if I happen to roll a high one, then I just change it. And I usually, when I have encounter tables, I usually actually choose. I don't roll. Sometimes I roll for it, but I'm usually actually just choosing. So it helps me a lot when I'm building adventures to have that idea of what's the whole range of the creatures and the NPCs that are in this environment in this setting. And again, it helps it make a more realistic world, I think.
And also the other thing too that I know that I think has only happened once in adventures that you've been running. Um, was the party ran into I think it was I want to say it was like three giants or something,
Mhm.
and I think we were mid, like level 9, level 10, somewhere in there, and I think my character threw up a wall of fire or thorns or ice or something, whatever it was, because I like doing that. Because it actually got us away from that encounter. Uh, because I think we had already just had a pretty rough encounter, and then we ran into these other ones, and so in my mind, it's okay for the heroes to run away once in a while, because you could be down in hit points. You could have had some sort of maimed character, like lost an arm or something, or had an eye damage they can't see very well. And even having a table like that, if you roll one of the higher CR levels, you could actually throw it in, but make it obvious that, yeah, well, you guys could get away in that direction. And that way the creature might not follow you for either because it got fit or you've put up a barrier or something. But I love that kind of stuff where you can actually run into monsters that it makes sense for them to be there, uh, even though they outmatch your party in every single way. And rather than just because that's the one thing I find sometimes parties do is that they just become like blunt instruments, and they're
Mhm.
like, oh, we got to get through this now. Oh, we got to get through that one. It's like,
Mhm.
no, guys, we could actually be stealthy, or we could run away, or we could
Mhm.
regroup, come back. Maybe the creature will still be there. It's munching away on whatever creatures we'd already killed or whatever. There's all kinds of ways to do that, and I yeah, again, that to me, it just brings, as I always say, it brings life and flavor to the game.
Mhm. Yeah, and you can also have the companions of the heroes or the local militia or military or another adventuring party
Exactly.
or some kind of folk hero, and they can step in and maybe take care of a monster that's tougher. And then maybe later, when the characters are more powerful, they will now surpass, these people who've helped them. But that can help make the world more realistic too. I always think it helps to have a world that's not too dark, because it the story just gets really imbalanced if that goes on for too long. It gets kind of like
Yeah.
this foreboding, kind of heavy feeling. Some people actually like that, but I think a better story is one where there is some more balance, and it actually outlines the evil and outlines the good in a more complete way, I think.
Well, especially since uh, a long time ago, probably God, 10 years ago now, um, I had a table called the emergency table, and it was basically uh, thing encounters that can help an adventure if
Mhm.
stuff does get bogged down, or if you can kind of sense the players are either getting bored or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And like having one of the encounters, one of the tables I have is basically a build of a bunch of different party encounters where you're encountering another party,
Mhm.
which say they could be going for the same thing you're going, or they could be passing through. But it was like a makeup of like 4 or 5 NPCs that were of different classes and
Yeah.
species and things. And that I think, actually I had a really great session once where that happened, and I rolled on that table, and the party that they encountered sort of came out of the woods and were like, "Oh, hey guys, how's it going?" And they all sat down and like had a long rest, and they had this probably half a session of them just, "Hey, so what have you encountered? What kind of..." And so they were able to get information about
Mhm.
the adventure from these other
Mhm.
NPCs. And I think they actually went together, if I remember correctly, for a little while, and then I think one player and the NPCs got killed, and then the other
Mhm.
players. It was fascinating to actually watch the players at the table kind of really kind of enjoy that, which surprised me, because you don't want to help out your competition if they're going for the same glory that you're going for, but
Mhm.
they actually did, and I thought that was kind of awesome. So, but yeah, I mean, there was those kinds of things that I think are also very cool to do. And then you have other NPCs that can act like HP sponges for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that also is pretty much the last thing that I do for getting ready is I just have a list of extra encounters, um, that can happen, almost anywhere, because again, I don't know what the party's gonna do. And then we have our Between Dungeons handbook too, which is one I can just open, and there's an
Exactly.
endless supply of, ideas in there and tables and possibilities. And sometimes those spontaneous things, can be great. Like in our game on Sunday, I knew that in the story, all the people were going to be coming out into the streets. And that was why the bad guys, the villains, were going to be able to gas the city, basically. But what I didn't realize was, because you'd actually foiled their attempt at doing that, when you arrived on these flying carpets above the city, now all of the citizens were outside looking in the sky, and they'd all watched this happen. And now, so I could have the whole city there cheering you. And what a perfect way to end, 4-year long 20th level campaign.
It was pretty epic because I think it took us a little while to figure out that uh, the weapons of mass destruction, as it were,
Mhm.
uh, you could actually break them. I was
Yeah,
thinking, oh man, we're gonna have to like evacuate the city. We're gonna have to do,
yeah,
and then one of the players was like, I'm gonna shoot it with a firebolt and see what happens. And you were like, and it shattered. And I'm like, oh, of course, we
yeah,
can stop them before they get to the city. But yeah, it I have to
yeah.
admit that was one of the moments of like, wow,
Yeah, the
for
only
my
thing I did was I decided it couldn't be damaged. They couldn't be damaged by area of effect magic. They basically had an enchantment, so you couldn't use a fireball or something like that. But I decided that any direct attack on these glass spheres, that was partly due to time. That's the other thing you always have to consider. how much time you have and in changing your story in your game. Um,
Right.
and that's part of it. And also that the players don't know what your plan is. So you can always change what they don't know, right? So
Well, exactly, and that's why, and then it's like with any creature encounter where, uh, you've nailed down the organic feel. You've got the creatures where they it makes sense for them to be, but every so often it's like, yeah, it's like, you know what? I just feel like throwing in a doubt trout. You know,
right,
there's a
right.
small pond over there with a fountain or something, and just this thing pops out. Maybe it's just a trout that's taken care of. It has a master that feeds it and cares for it, and doesn't try to like make them doubt. But you disturb this one. Like that's the
Mhm.
thing, right? All of these sorts of encounters are it doesn't take a whole lot to set them down, make them all perfect, but then you know your players might do something completely unexpected. You're like, oh crap, okay, table X, all right, so now you encounter seven dragons and not two, that kind of stuff where
Yeah,
you know you're already going to like have that encounter with that particular creature, and adding a couple more might make it a bit more challenging, or adding a creature that complements it. Like
yeah,
there's been encounters that you've done where the creatures are completely different. It makes total sense for them to be in that environment, but they're competing. That if
yeah,
they were just creatures encountering each other, they would compete for food, resources,
yeah,
whatever. But
yeah.
this party stumbles into them, pisses one group off. The other group's like, "What's that commotion over there? Oh, those
Hmm.
jerks that ate our food yesterday. Hey, who are those guys?" Like, and then they just kind of, and you hope that they have like, maybe one set of creatures has ranged attacks, where the other ones have to be more melee. So
Right.
yeah, and and when they combine their powers together, they form water, and then suddenly you all drown. So there we go. The creativity, I like this sort of stuff. It's my
Yeah,
bag, baby.
I was just thinking, there's a great director who does a lot of indie movies, Richard Linklater. So
Hmm.
he did the Before Sunrise movies and a movie called Slacker and a movie called a new movie, well, fairly new called Everybody Wants Some. I just had to look on my phone because I have the soundtrack. And he did the movie Boyhood, I believe. Yeah, he did Boyhood too, the one where they actually filmed it over several years. And his style is that he creates a story, and then you come in to watch it, and it's ongoing, and you just watch what happens. In a way, there's no plot. In a way, you're actually an observer to something that's going on. So, and that's sort of how I set my stories up too, in terms of there's things going on before the characters get to the story. If they never did anything, I know what's going to happen. I know what the story is. All these other groups and factions and creatures and everything and politics. That's all going on without the characters. So that helps me. Basically, I know the motivations of all those characters in the story, that they have this world going on. They have these things happening, and then the players happen to come into it, and I have no idea what they're going to do. But no matter what they do, because I know the motivations of everything and I know what's going on, even when they're not there, I basically just go with it. Um,
Yeah, that's an
and
important skill.
well, I think there's lots of ways to have adventures, but I think I love the movies. I love what he does in that way, where, like for example, in D&D, it would be if the party, say the party travels out of town for a while and they go and investigate a dungeon and then they come back to their hometown. While they're away, things are still happening. So when they
Yeah.
come back, they'll find out, oh, this changed and this thing happened and this person did this and they said that. And wherever they're going in the world, it's still alive and it's still going on regardless of what they do. And as they become more powerful, they're going to have more impact.
Well, it's like when in the Lord of the Rings books, when they return to Hobbiton, and Hobbiton has been taken over, and
Mm-hmm.
is being, it's like a town's been burned down, the tree is damaged, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, stuff has occurred, and in that story, the stuff that was occurring at home was because of the stuff they did while they were,
Yeah.
traveling. But then
Yeah.
they went off to go do the other thing, and the guy that they made unhappy, partway through was like, you know what? I know exactly where those jerks came from. I'm gonna go and take over there. Well, they're not gonna be back forever. So
Right.
yeah, then you have all these. The world just keeps churning, even though your focal point for the game, the specific adventure you're in, you're going into that environment, you're encountering those creatures, you're going into that environment, encountering those creatures. You get to the very end, you defeat. Hopefully, you defeat the big bad, and then get to go home.
Mm-hmm.
And but you're right. They come back and stuff is still going on. Like, oh, what do you
Mm-hmm.
mean everyone moved away? What? There was
Yeah.
a storm and like stuff happened. Oh man. So that actually could launch characters into another adventure. Like, where did
Mm-hmm.
your hometown go? They all had to leave. So yeah, I mean, actually, I think we had that a little bit in the Firefly adventure, or sorry, Dragonfly adventure, where we left and came back. I seem to remember, and as the town had been ransacked by pirates or something, and but yeah, same sort of thing. Like the world kept churning, and you were like, "Yep." So, oh, you're going back there. Okay, great. You're regrouping. All right, excellent. Oh, guess what? Undead everywhere. The town is nothing like you remember it, and everyone left, so or died or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that was cool. I mean, those kinds of things are it keeps players guessing, which I really like to do. Is they try to figure out what the big adventure is. They try to figure out what's going on, and they're getting bits of information along the way. And when they think they've got it, hopefully there's something else that's in the background that's like, well, not really. It could be an undead king, but no, there is no undead king. What do you mean
Mm-hmm.
there's no undead king? It's actually, God has come down. He's like, I'm bored. Those kinds of things. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, yeah. D&D is awesome.
Yeah. It's a game, a fun game, the best game.
It's just a game. um, we've been going for a while. We've talked about a lot of cool stuff. Any last sort of things about the Kickstarter? You've kind of filled us all in already, but
The Kickstarter is pretty much in motion. I'm really just managing, as the art comes in. That'll take a few months, and then our next plan is for a book for Mir to update the world and add more to it. So we're hoping to kickstart
very
that
cool.
in November, and then next
Excellent.
year we'll start fundraising for adventures, and we hope to, yeah, write quite a few of those. And again, Travis is working with us, and yeah, we'll see. Lots could go on. I got a new publishing contact today, so we'll see where that goes.
Very cool.
Because as you know, the big challenge is being seen in a world where a lot of people can publish now.
Yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, looking forward to seeing the art. That's one of the favorite parts for me of creating these books is writing the description of all the monsters for Travis and then seeing what he comes up with. And yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I remember you describing that process to me at one time, where you said, and then the art comes in, and I'm like, awesome. Maybe every 5 or 10 things, I'm like, could you add a sword there? Excellent. That kind of stuff. I mean, that's
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
it's not even like that. It's like every 50th picture I'm like, oh, could you change this slightly? Maybe that almost never happens because I just love what he does. And there's a certain kind of feel that I'm looking for, certain kind of look, and that's why I wanted him to work with us. And so I rarely give any kind of notes for the art because I just get it back and go, wow. And because he adds so much more. He adds, like, he'll put ruins on a sword, or he'll put a design on a person's clothes, He'll give the monster. Sometimes, once in a while, he adds things that aren't, because now he has, now the way we do it, he has the stat block and the description.
Right.
So, and the bio. So he has the full range to work with. And he'll sometimes add things that have nothing to do with what the monster is. So I will have to go back and add a few things in the text in the manuscript. But again, 99% of the time, I love it of what he did, and once in a while he'll come back to me and say, "Can you change? Can you change it quite a bit?" And usually I say, "Yeah, sure."
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great relationship to have because he makes great art, and I like his stuff. But other than that, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you everyone for watching, and also everything we've talked about. If there's relevant links and all that kind of fun stuff, they'll be all down below in the description. And of course, don't forget we have the audio version which you can subscribe to wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, we'll see you all next week because we have more to talk about, because we could talk about this for 500 years and we would never get bored. So there you go. Thank you all, and we'll see you guys next time.
Later.
Bye.